Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia Matrix-12-V tutorial series. Today we're going to deal with one of the most important sound sculpting tools available to us, that's envelopes. If you're enjoying this series and you want to help support my channel, check out the Patreon or YouTube channel member links below. Fabulous way to do that. Enormous thanks to everybody who's signed up so far. It means a great deal to me. Now, every single sound has a volume envelope. We're just going to concentrate on the concept of volume to start with. And this envelope describes how quickly the sound goes from no volume to maximum volume. Then once it's hit its maximum volume, does it stay there? Or does it come down or change to a new volume level? Then once the sound's stabilized at its regular output volume, what's that volume going to be? And finally, once the sound stops, how quickly does it tail away? What I've just described there is an ADSR envelope. It has an attack, decay, sustain, and release. I'm going to show you all of those in a moment. The Matrix-12 has a 5-point envelope system because we have the concept of delay as well. So it's a D-ADSR envelope, but the first D stands for delay and the second D stands for decay. Let's demonstrate every one of those concepts. Now, as you can see, I've currently got envelope 2 selected. And as we saw very briefly in episode 1, envelope 2 is the one that is the envelope that describes the volume of the sound that happens when I press a key. So here's me pressing a key down. The sound starts immediately the moment I press a key. It stays at a constant volume while the key is held down, and then as soon as I let the key go, the sound stops. Let's manipulate that a little bit, and we'll go from left to right. The first setting that I'm going to change is delay. So now if I increase some delay, I'm going to press a key in 3, 2, 1. That delay there in between me pressing the key and the envelope triggering or firing is generated by this delay. If I make the value bigger, 3, 2, 1, longer delay. Pretty obvious what's going on. You might think, well, there's not very much point in that. The moment I press a key, I want to hear some sound. I'll give you an example of the use of delay a little bit later in this episode. Let's move on to attack next. This is how long the envelope takes to get from minimum volume to maximum volume. So here's my pressing the key down. You can see it in the oscilloscope. Watch the sound get louder in the oscilloscope. The signal gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, decay's a funny one. If I turn this all the way up, at the moment, you're going to hear no change to the tone at all. Press the key down, hear the sound, let the key go, sound disappears. In order for decay to do anything, we need some sustain level. So the sustain level is the volume that's going to occur while the key's held down after its attack and decay phases have completed. So let's keep everything nice and simple. I'll turn decay back off again. I'm just going to turn the volume, the overall output of the volume of the synthesizer down a little bit so I can talk, because I'm going to hold this key down for quite a long time now. So I'm just going to set myself at a constant volume. That's the example volume that I'm going to use now. And I'll turn the sustain down. And as I turn this knob down, you can hear the volume getting quieter and quieter and quieter. So this is the static volume that we're hearing while the key is held down. Once I let go, the key is going to carry on making that sound until I let it go, and then the sound stops instantly. Now that we've got a sustain shelf, so this is the constant outgoing volume that's going to occur, I can reintroduce the concept of decay. So now we're going to come down from the maximum volume, which is this instantaneous moment at the end of the attack phase, and then we're going to come back from that maximum volume down to a new sustain shelf. I'll give myself a nice healthy decay. I'll press a key, watch it on the oscilloscope. It's going to get instantly as loud as it can, and then it'll tail away. And eventually, after the length of time, this arbitrary period of time specified by the decay value, we settle on this sustain shelf. I can now adjust that sustain shelf, make the volume louder. So the combination of decay and sustain together give you this initial hit, this burst of energy once the end of the attack phase is completed, and then the decay phase allows you to settle down to a new value. All of the things being equal, the sustain level can never be louder than the volume at the end of the attack phase. So let's bring all of those three, attack, decay and sustain, all into the picture. Now the volume's going to get louder, then quieter, and then hold static. there we are holding static. The last value to introduce is release, and this is literally what happens once we let the key go. So just give yourself a bit more sustain, introduce some release, press the key down, there's it getting quieter, there's it hitting the sustain shelf. Now I'm holding the key down, I'm going to let the key go in 3, 2, 1, and there's the sound fading away to nothing. So that's our full delay, attack, decay, sustain, release envelope defined. Now at the end of all of that, we've got this curious extra setting, the 6th value, which is the amplitude. This is something that it's really easy to become confused about. This is not the amplitude of the overall sound. The amplifier is responsible for the volume of the overall sound, and the amplifier, well, there are two in this particular synthesizer. As we saw, they're over in the filter section. VCAs 1 and 2 determine the volume of a thing. This is the size of the envelope, and it's a subtle difference, but it really is important. This is how much change this envelope is going to be allowed to impose on the overall sound. So try to imagine this conceptually. We've got this envelope shape involving an attack slope and a decay slope and a sustain shelf and then a release slope. All of that wraps up into a single shape. This amplitude level describes how comprehensively that shape is going to be applied to the overall amplitude coming out of the VCA2. So I'll pull the attack and decay down a little bit so that we get to our sustain point a bit quicker. I'll press a key. So this is the level, this is the volume of output of the synthesizer at the moment. If we have a look at the volume, seeing the analyzer down below, I'm just hovering over the fundamental. And it's about minus 31, minus 30.6 I think. Oh, there's a minus 29.8. So let's call it minus 30 dB. That's the volume of the loudest harmonic in this sound. Now I'm going to allow this envelope to have a smaller impact on the overall volume. In other words, I'm going to decrease the amplitude of the envelope being applied to the amplifier. I'll press the same key again. Now it's clearly audibly quieter if we hover over the wave. Getting about minus 37 now. So it's over twice as quiet. There's a 6 decibel difference in volume. Volume halves or doubles every 6 decibels. The envelope itself is still exactly the same shape. It's just being allowed to have less impact on the thing that it's mapped to. And the thing that it's mapped to is our volume knob. If you kind of interpret VCA2 as our overall volume knob, if that seems unnecessarily complicated to you, it's because the concept of envelopes is a completely generic one. At the moment, we're only examining it in the context of volume, the overall volume of the synthesizer, and that's such an intuitive concept that it's difficult to imagine other examples of envelopes being applied. So in order to try to demystify that a little bit, let's have a look at an envelope applying to something else. I'm going to throw my init sound away and get back to it so that we're once again completely fresh out of the box. And this time we're going to ignore volume. Don't want to have anything to do with volume. We're going to have a look at an envelope applying to a different parameter. And it turns out that this init preset has one built in for us for free. Because down at the bottom of the screen, kind of lurking over the course of this video, keeping itself to itself, is our modulation matrix. Big subject in its own right, don't want to deal with it today, but it is telling you that envelope 1 is doing a job in this preset. It's actually mapped to the filter frequency. We haven't paid any attention to this up until now, but we're going to. So let's have a look at envelope 1. Again, the envelope is as simple as you can possibly imagine. Happens instantly, 0 decay time, sustain level at maximum amplitude, and the overall amplitude of the envelope is also set to maximum. What's that thing doing? What's the envelope doing? Well, it's mapped to filter frequency. You can actually see these mappings, see these little green dots. Any setting in this synthesizer that can have a modulation source attached to it is labelled in yellow, and if there is a source attached to it, you get these little green lights coming on. So you can see that both VCA2 and frequency have their green lights lit. What's more, if you click on the description itself, you get this helpful little modulation page telling you what those mappings are. And so now we can see that the filter frequency is mapped to envelope 1. And I'm really going to mess with your head in a minute because we've got yet another level or amplitude amount that can be applied to these settings. Try not to worry too much about this number 32 at the moment. Let's deal with everything as simply as we can. Here's how I'm going to demonstrate the envelope filter in use. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the filter frequency down to halfway. Then I'm going to increase the attack of the filter itself to about 40. I'll press a key. Have a look in the spectrum analyzer in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. You'll see the sound starts off dull and then gets brighter. You see all these upper frequencies being introduced as the sound gets brighter. Let's make it a little bit more dramatic. I'll pull the original frequency down. And now you can see that filter frequency range being applied. So let's just take a moment before we go any further to have a think about what's going on here. The envelope has an attack phase. So imagine this envelope, it's basically only doing one thing. The attack phase is the only thing that's doing any work, really. Once the attack phase is complete, the envelope is going to hold at maximum amplitude, so it's doing as much as it possibly can after this point. But over the course of that attack phase, it's basically virtually turning the filter knob up in the background. 38 indicates the starting value of the filter frequency, the corner point in Matrix-12 terms, or the cutoff frequency. And then over a period of time specified by this attack level, that cutoff or corner point is going to go up. In other words, the filter, this is a low pass filter, so the sound's going to get brighter. So I'll press that key one more time and let the sound settle out. And we have this still quite dull curve, but it has introduced those additional high frequencies. Now what I'm going to do is turn the amplitude of the envelope down. So this envelope is now going to have a smaller effect on the overall tone. And so when it settles down after the attack phase is completed, the overall sound is going to be duller. I can do that in real time, turn the amplitude back up again. There's those high frequencies being reintroduced. And here we are cutting them away. If I turn this amplitude all the way down to 0, it's as if we have no mapping at all. In other words, we're now hearing the native frequency coming out of the filter. Bring that amplitude back in, reintroduce the envelope. And now I'm going to introduce some delay into the envelope. And this is a better example than when we were dealing with volume of delay having a practical use in the tone. Because if I introduce delay, initially we're going to start out with a dull tone. That dull tone is going to hold steady for a period of time, and then it'll get brighter. Bit more delay. There we go. Let's make that attack a little bit longer. And now you can hear that envelope really having a breathing effect on the sound. And now we can really start thinking about using this envelope as a genuine modulation source. Let's have some extra decay. Let's pull back from our initial hit on the sustain level, and we're starting to describe quite complex tonal impact that this envelope is having on the filter unit. Let's try that. Brighter, and then it's tailing away to a duller sound. It's very subtle. Pull that back a bit more. There we go. Try that again. Brighter, duller, hold steady, let the key go. The one thing I can't demonstrate at the moment is the filter envelope having an impact on the release. If I introduce as much release as I like, it doesn't matter, because the moment I let the key go, the amplitude envelope is cutting the sound dead. So even though the filter envelope is doing something in the background, it's probably still tailing away as I speak. It's not having any effect on the sound because there is no sound. The amplifier has been reduced to 0. Let's see a real world example of a filter release actually doing something. So I'll crank the release up. I'm also going to need to switch back over to our volume envelope. Envelope 2 is taking care of that, and I'll give us some release over there as well. So now when I press a key, it's going to get brighter and duller and all of that stuff that we just saw with the filter envelope. When I let the key go, in addition to the volume starting to fade away and the sound gets quieter, you'll see the high frequencies be attenuated in the spectrum analyzer as well. Brighter, duller, hit the shelf. There we are at our frequency and volume shelf. I'm going to let the key go now. Watch these high frequencies tail away as the sound gets quieter. And now the shelf is basically done, and we're just having a volume attenuation. So let's have a look. I had a release of 51 on envelope 2 and a smaller release on the filter envelope. So the filter envelope was finished before the volume envelope took over and took the rest of the sound away. One final thing for us to look at today, I'm just going to throw the preset away and get back to our initial value again. Envelopes are positive value only modulation sources. In other words, they go from 0 up to something bigger than 0. But it is possible in the Matrix-12 to have an envelope that has an inverted effect on a sound. In other words, you can go below 0, just not using the envelope itself. Now this is a little bit tricky to demonstrate. It's kind of the advanced concept of the envelopes tutorial, but here we are at the end of the episode, and it's going to require my use of the modulation page. Remember this 32 that I kind of asked you to ignore a little bit earlier on? This is the modulation amount for the two values that are tied together. So at the moment we're having a look at envelope 1 being tied to the filter frequency. Well, we can have negative numbers. And what I'm going to do is set the filter frequency in the middle of the band, so it's got basically headroom to play with on both sides. And I'm going to give myself an attack value. So ordinarily we go from dull to bright. Let's just hear that again. Okay. A negative value is going to go from bright to dull. So now everything that you imagine that the envelope would want to do literally gets inverted. We're now in the upside down. That's perfectly okay for something like filter frequency, where it was really easy for me to set the corner point in the middle of the frequency curve, and then this envelope, which is still a positive envelope, is having an inverted effect on the modulation destination, so we're affecting the filter frequency here. Now that's the easy use case. Throw that sound away again and get back to our basic one. Now I'm going to try to do the same with the volume envelope, and things are going to go horribly wrong. If I switch over to envelope 2, and we can see the mapping between envelope 2 and the VCA2. It's currently set to 63. Well, what's going to happen if I set that to negative 63? I'll press a key. Absolute silence. This is very difficult to actually demonstrate, and we're going to have an issue because this is a multi-timbral synthesizer. Is it as simple as turning VCA2 up? The answer is no. Watch what happens when I do. It's not a very nice sound. That's 12 different voices, all sounding simultaneously. The envelope only has an impact on the sound when a key is pressed down. The moment you let that key go, the envelope is done. If we turn our VCA up, it basically means that sound is escaping out of the synthesizer 100% of the time. So you've got basically the last 12 keys that I pressed on this keyboard, they're all going to generate those tones completely unrestricted. The only way that you can make sense out of negative values, and this is kind of a ridiculous thing to do, quite frankly, but from a demonstration perspective, it might be helpful for you to kind of see things from a slightly different perspective. I'm going to temporarily turn this into a monophonic synthesizer. I'm going to need to dip into some advanced stuff here. We'll deal with all of this in more detail later on in the series, but I've just turned this synthesizer into a monophonic synth. So first things first is to give myself a nice simple. So you can hear me basically holding a C down and then I'm pressing G. That's obviously now a monophonic synthesizer. Now that I've got that level of control over the synth, if I press a key, I'm going to press a key now, and now the envelope is having the inverted effect on the synthesizer. So I've still got the key held down. It should be -63 really. But this negative modulation effect here is saying that the envelope, which is set to maximal sustain, 63 is the biggest envelope it can possibly have. That's being flipped. That's then being used as a modulation source, mapping into VCA2. And while I have this key held down, the VCA is being completely suppressed. Doesn't matter how much I turn this amplitude up, the amplifier is now basically outputting the loudest signal it possibly can. The moment I let this key go, the sound's going to escape again. There it is. Hot press the key down and it's suppressed. So I've just inverted the envelope. That's something that you're going to want to do very rarely. But just to demonstrate that all of these modulation sources can be inverted and it can be done with volume as well. It's just a little bit head bending. So we just stepped slightly beyond envelopes 101 there, and I think I deserve a cup of tea. So I'm going to call it a day there. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much.